Good afternoon and welcome to United TV. My name is Kemal Erkan. Today's our wellness webinar presentation we are going to have, and I am going to have my other panelists joining me, waiting for them. Today we are going to discuss the intuitive eating of eating for patients with diabetes. And there is Donna Gunkel, and there's Caroline, and there is Ern. So how are you ladies doing today?
Good, thank you.
Doing well.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Thank
Just so that we, people who are already following us for a long time, they know who we are. We just want to make sure that those this is their first time, they actually know United Medical ACO. This is our accredited diabetes center with dietitians, licensed dietitians. There are about 5 of them right now. Caroline is leading that team, and we have Dr. Ripu Handal from First Aid Endo as our program director. So today we are going to do the clinical presentation, so I'm going to let Ern to take over.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen for our presentation today. All right. Can you all see my screen okay?
We can, thank you.
All right, so as Kemal mentioned, this is our team for our wellness program. We do this every second Friday of the month. And today we have Ern on with us. She is co-hosting with me. She is one of our other dietitians on our team, and we're going to be talking about fad diets and diabetes management. So fad diets is something you might have heard the phrase fad diets before, but it's really just a big umbrella term for just diets out there that might be popping up here and there. They are what you call a fad. They're short-lived usually. So today we're just going to kind of talk about what's a fad diet, how to identify it, why it might not be appropriate for our diabetes management. And then Ern is going to help me identify certain types of fad diets that you might see out there, and then we'll kind of wrap it all up at the end. But what is a fad diet? So a fad diet is a trendy weight loss plan that promotes dramatic results. They're based on very little scientific evidence and share pretty much the following characteristics that you see here. So quick fix, promotes some magic combination food, something to melt belly fat, or you see those advertisements listed all over social media and things. It does exclusion diets, so like heavily restricting certain nutrients, claims based on single studies, or emphasizing one food group over the other. So that fad diet usually is pretty extreme. You'll normally see it's usually one side or the other, and it's pretty rigid for the most part. So why don't fad diets work, right? We often don't recommend some of these diets that we're going to talk about soon, but we want to talk about why they're not the best option. So the biggest thing is limited scientific evidence. So fad diets are often backed by very little science. There's issues such as eliminating certain food groups, removing essential nutrients from the diet that could cause any kind of deficiency. Nutrition is a science, and so a lot of our recommendations are based off of heavy scientific evidence and research. So we don't want to be doing things that could impact our body that haven't really been studied, researched, or know that it's not going to be dangerous or harmful to our body. We often see that these fad diets are a one-size-fits-all, giving you a specific calorie range for everybody, a specific eating pattern for someone, a window of eating that's going to fit you, right? But it doesn't look at you as the unique individual. Every single person is metabolically, different, right? We need to have individualized eating recommendations for every single person, which is what us as RDs do. We work individual case-by-case basis to find a way that makes sense for you, that works for your body. We often find they're also unsustainable. So if you look at some of these dramatic plans that we'll talk about, they're usually unsustainable long-term with, if any, short-lived benefits. They may have, one thing in common that they recommend doing this thing so that you get this benefit, right? This big benefit. Sometimes it's weight loss, sometimes it's improved lab work or things like that. And normally it might work. You might see some improvement, but it's unsustainable. So you can't carry it out your whole lifetime. So then we end up seeing those benefits drop off if there are any. It actually does, to kind of go into these patterns of fad diets, harm your metabolism. When we restrict things, right, we go back, I think we've talked about it many times before in these sessions, it hurts your metabolism, right? So you go into this kind of scarcity. Your body thinks, nutrients are scarce, so it's going to slow down your metabolism because you want to hold on to everything you can get because there might be a famine coming, right? There might be another diet. Your body kind of gets that rhythm over time. So it can do harmful things to the metabolism. And it might regain, you might have some rebound weight gain too that comes from these fad diets. When you kind of yo-yo diet, you'll see that yo-yo weight gain. Or you might, gain all this weight back, maybe more than you even, had before after doing some of these things. And that yo-yo weight gain can cause increased risks of cardiovascular disease, disordered eating thoughts and patterns. So it's important that we don't kind of go in this direction of yo-yo dieting, going into these fad quick fixes, because they can be pretty harmful to your system. And then you get into the restricting key nutrients. When you take out a whole food group, you're losing all the vitamins, minerals, beneficial things that your body needs. So there could be some severe nutrient deficiencies. And there are certain diets out there that you might choose to, change a lifestyle pattern. Like if someone wants to go vegan, that's perfectly fine because they have, certain convictions about animals or things like that. But then we want to take a closer look. Are you meeting your B12? Are you getting certain vitamins and minerals and missing out on certain things? Because then we can supplement for them. But then we don't want to just go on a diet willy-nilly and not take account for those vitamins that could be missing, those nutrients that could be missing. And we don't want to be so reliant on supplements that we're missing all the good things that come from food, because really the food first approach is how we get the best absorption of those nutrients. So then why are fad diets harmful for our diabetes management? We see that some weight reduction does help with our diabetes management. So why wouldn't a fad diet that, helps us lose weight be beneficial? Fad diets don't take into account your unique carbohydrates, sugars, or basic nutrition requirements that you need to function each day. So there are a lot of low carb, keto diet, things like that, that heavily restrict carbohydrates. But the recommendations actually, I think it's a minimum of 130 grams per day. Your brain actually needs 130 grams of carbohydrates a day to function properly. So that is a recommended daily allowance that they put out there as well, or 45 to 65% of your calories should come from carbs. It's your body's preferred source of energy. And just going and restricting that could do some harmful things. And it could make your blood sugars fluctuate. And we really want to take that approach in going into, diabetes counseling with us, that you learn to, not fear carbs, that carbs can be helpful. And there's quality over quantity, right? We can talk about the quality of carbs that we eat rather than just a specific amount. We can talk about what is going to benefit you in the long run and be sustainable too. These diets often offer temporary weight loss benefits, but most are unsustainable. In the next slide, we'll see kind of a cycle, the diet cycle that, a lot of people have gone through. It's you kind of get in that rebound weight gain cycle too, like we talked about. When you restrict your nutrients, your body goes into the scarcity mindset of I have to preserve, what I have. And we don't want to drop weight really fast, gain it really fast, because that can be harmful on our body. Restriction-based fad diets can increase your cravings and binge eating behavior. We find a lot of the time, especially if you're restricting certain nutrients during the day, you're going to crave those at nighttime because your body is trying to, catch up from the day of not getting enough to eat. But you could also have, I know, food noise, right? I've heard that technical term too, of feeling, food obsession or things. I'm thinking about food all the time, and it mostly comes from a place of restriction. We're restricting heavily, either physically or mentally, for the foods we can and can't eat. So going into those fad diets could put you in that restriction mindset, which could cause you to binge later on. and eat, tenfold of what you would have eaten if you would have just had a balanced meal. So that binge eating behavior can negatively impact your blood sugar levels because, you'll get a spike, or maybe you're not eating enough and then your blood sugar plummets. So we don't want that blood sugar fluctuation, and where we could have had avoided that if we would have just had consistent eating patterns through the day. So we want to make sure we also don't go, we'll talk about some fasting and things like that, but we don't want our blood sugar to plummet, jump up, go back and forth. There's even parts where if you don't eat, for long periods of time, your liver compensates, right? Your liver is going to release extra sugar into your system to make sure you're getting enough. So your body has this built-in little safety net here to make sure that you're going to stay alive, but we're constantly fighting against it. And these fad diets don't necessarily benefit us for our diabetes management. So this is the little cycle I was talking about the vicious diet cycle, right? We have a diet, we go into this famine response where we lose weight from lean muscle and fat, right? So we maybe are taking from muscle too if we're not eating enough. We have a reduced metabolic rate, increase in fat storage, and then we fall off because it's unsustainable. But then we go into a feast response. So reduced metabolic rate, loss of muscle, regain of weight from fat, right? So we're, constantly eating because we weren't getting enough beforehand, and then we repeat it. But there's also a psychological aspect of these too. They really, really weigh you down of feeling like I failed. I haven't done, all I needed to do. When really the diet failed you. You didn't fail the diet. The diet was unsustainable to begin with. So that is a vicious cycle that goes through that we hopefully want to avoid by educating on what is a fad diet, what isn't a fad diet. So how to spot a fad diet? There's 2 tips that we have. So we want to first direct you to nutrition professionals. They're the only credentialed professional that has the metabolic, nutrition background, the training to give you sound nutrition advice that's based on scientific evidence. So we want you to look for the credentials after our names, which is usually an RD, RDN, LDN for licensed dietitian nutritionist. And certified nutritionists are not the same as dietitians. So you want to have that RD credential behind your name because those RDs are the only ones that have been trained for, about 1,200 hours of hands-on training experience, gone through a board certified exam. So look for your nutrition professional that's credentialed in that area so that they can guide you in sound nutrition advice and recommendations. Tip number 2 is look for the red flags. So these are just some of the red flags that pop up that we want you to be able to identify if you come across a diet online or scrolling the internet, that you can say, okay, this is probably not what I want to pursue long term. So anything that promises a quick fix, right? Lose 30 pounds in 30 days. This will cure your diabetes, right? We want to make sure that you know that it's a long road, right? So consistency, we always say strive for persistence, not perfection, and just kind of moving in a, health promoting behaviors rather than a quick fix. There is no such thing as a quick fix. It's always going to take change and behavior change on that part. Claims that sound to be too good to be true. So if it sounds like too good to be true, it probably is, like those big, heavy, dramatic claims. Recommendations made to help or sell book products, things like that. If they're selling something, it is likely a fad diet. If they're selling certain kinds of pills or things like that, usually they aren't backed by a lot of research studies, which gets you into some of these later ones, like recommended based on a single study or testimonials. We don't want to put all of our trust into those types of diets because they haven't been backed by extensive research. We don't know the long-term effects. Some of these are only studied for 12 weeks, and then what happens after? So we're in the long-term game here, where we want you to have long, sustainable wellness and diabetes management for your whole life, not just for those 12 weeks of the study. Elimination of any food groups, of any specific nutrients, or stressing a specific nutrient here and there. Like there's the grapefruit diet where you have a lot of grapefruit. That could do some harm in many different areas based on medication you're on, based on your blood sugar levels of having excess citrus in your diet, and lots of sugars. So we want to make sure that we're not, swinging the pendulum in any certain direction. It's, all foods are good foods, which is what we talk about all the time in our counseling. Simplistic conclusions drawn from a complex study, a list of good food, bad foods, recommendations from studies that ignore differences among individuals or groups, right? That one size all approach where they say one diet is going to help every single person. And then diets on testimonials, right? So obviously testimonials are important, but what works for one person might not work for another person. So these are just some of the red flags that we want to be able to identify when spotting a fad diet out there. Now I'm going to hand it over to Erin, who's going to talk about a couple different types of fad diets to be on the lookout for.
All right, thanks, Caroline. Very, very informative. There's a couple of those red flags that you mentioned that I will be going through in some of these diets as well. So these are just a few of the diets that are pretty popular out there nowadays, whether it's due to good marketing or just that we have heard these diets from patients and they're coming to us and asking us about them. So these are the trendy ones, and then some of them may not be as popular, but they are becoming trendy. And some of them are pretty dangerous, so we want to touch on them before you might consider them for yourself. Next slide, please. All right, so we are starting with the GOLO diet. I've heard a lot of questions about this diet recently. Great marketing. Their tagline is to lose weight without dieting, which already, when Caroline was talking about the red flags, sort of promising you something that sounds almost impossible. When we look into it, what does it require? It basically recommends a really large calorie deficit. They generally ask you to do about 1,200, top end about 1,400 calories a day, which is not a lot for an adult individual. That is really close to what a child would have. And if your child's active, maybe they would need a little bit more than that. But more importantly, it requires a weight loss supplement that is sold by them alongside this large calorie deficit. So it's not really a cheap thing at all. The starting package, I pulled this off their website, starts at about $279, where you get this supplement called Release. It is made by them. It has 7 natural plant-based ingredients and 3 minerals, zinc, magnesium, chromium. They have a couple of extracts on there like banana leaf, rhodiola rosea, berberine, salacia, gardenia, and then there's some sugar alcohols in there, inositol, and apple extract. This supplement plus a guidebook, and then you get some meal plans and recipes, and then this guidebook that's defeating diet obstacles, all for $279, but you only get 1 bottle of supplement. Now, the way that they're selling this to you is that you would need a certain amount of supplement depending on how much weight you're trying to lose. So 1 bottle of this Release is recommended to lose about 10 to 20 pounds, and it's going to cost you $60. If you need to lose more than that, between 21 to 40 pounds, it's going to cost you $100 for 2 bottles of this. And then if you want to lose anywhere in that 50 to 60 pound range, it's going to cost you $120 for 3 bottles of this supplement. Now, if we look into the ingredients of the supplement, all these extracts have very limited clinical evidence, right? So the banana leaf extract, for example, there's very little evidence. It's not very strong evidence that shows that it may be used to lower blood glucose levels in some people with diabetes. And then the rhodiola rosea is a flowering plant, and it may impact cells that store fat. Specifically in the midsection, again, we know that there is no spot reduction when it comes to fat reduction when you're losing weight. And so that already is kind of like a red flag dinging. Nutrition and dietetics, as Caroline has mentioned, is a science, and we really believe in an evidence-based practice. And so when a diet like this doesn't have, enough scientific evidence backing it with its supplement, and also the FDA doesn't regulate any of the supplements that are on the shelves, it becomes a really easy marketing tool to promise something like weight loss and blood sugar stabilization. And it's not something that we would recommend as registered dietitians. Also, when taking something like this, if you are going in believing that it might help diabetes, we definitely recommend talking to your PCP or your endocrinologist, whoever is helping you manage that, to make sure that it is safe. Because if it does affect your blood sugars and maybe it lowers it, and you are on a medication that's already lowering your blood sugars or stabilizing it, that can cause, again, a lot of fluctuations in your blood sugar throughout the day and can get dangerous, because if it causes your blood sugar to tank when you're not used to it tanking in certain times of the day, then a low blood sugars like hypoglycemia gets really dangerous. And so we definitely don't recommend it in this setting or in any setting. Next slide. Okay, the keto diet. It is extremely popular, especially in the past 5 to 10 years. It is a low carb, high fat diet. It was actually originally designed in a hospital setting, so very specific for an epileptic pediatric population. So they found that all of these kids who had seizures had less seizures when they were placed on an extremely low carb, extremely high fat diet, and they did a lot better. A side effect of this diet then was weight loss, and somebody really clever decided to market that as a weight loss approach. Now, sustainability was one of the main issues when it comes to fat diets that Caroline mentioned, because how long are you going to be able to go without carbohydrates, which is your body's main source of energy? So this is an example of an elimination of a main energy source, right? So we talked about how unsustainable that is, but also it doesn't take into account what you're missing and what you have to supplement and where your body's getting that energy from. So carbs are extremely necessary and can come in different forms, right? If you're looking at carbs as a whole group, you have, of course, the junkier carbs like your refined sugars and your candy and your cookies and ice cream, but you also have complex carbohydrates that are necessary for a healthy lifestyle and just basic nutrition coming from whole fruits and whole grains. A lot of high fiber, a lot of micronutrients in there that we need just to survive. And especially for diabetics, this can be very chaotic for your blood sugars if you're not eating any carbs or enough carbs in the day, because again, it becomes a risk for low blood sugars and a risk for that liver to kind of compensate. And again, that is not as easy to control in terms of blood sugars throughout the day. And if our goal is to keep them stable, this is not a way to keep them stable at all. And the other part of the keto diet that people don't really talk about, other than the low carb, is the high fat part of it. So a lot of patients who are on a keto diet are often told that you can just eat anything you want, cheese, meats, and as much of that as you want, on top of kind of keeping carbs on the down low. This increases the intake of saturated fat many fold from what is actually recommended for us. And from the past couple of wellness webinars, we've learned that saturated fat is really one of the main contributors to, cholesterol going up and triglycerides going up and overall cardiovascular risk going up. And that is one of the main, causes of death in the United States. And so we really shouldn't be encouraging this pattern of eating necessarily. All right, next one. So intermittent fasting is also an extremely popular diet. Again, Caroline mentioned that a lot of these fad diets do work to an extent, right? So intermittent fasting, a lot of people have had success with it. The issue with it is sustainability, because even like big studies that have been done on intermittent fasting, compliance is going to be the main problem. So beyond 6 months, compliance is kind of blurry. So people are able to keep up with it up to 6 months. And then after that, it kind of drops off, or it becomes inconsistent, which then eventually falls back into some sort of like disordered eating pattern where you're kind of picking and choosing the windows that you want to eat. And that is not what intermittent fasting is. Now, the hypothesized mechanisms of intermittent fasting are based on rodent studies, and they involve the body's circadian rhythm. They suggest that restricting food for a long period of time can potentially decrease insulin levels, and claims that when the gut is resting or your fasting period, gut permeability decreases and then inflammation decreases. But all of these are done on rodent studies, right? So we still don't know what's going to happen if we were to intermittent fast forever as humans. And it promotes an eating window generally that is about no longer than 8 hours long. So you have about a 6 to 8 hour window to get all of your calories in for that day. It's then followed by a fasting period, and it could range from 16 hours to a maximum of 1.5 days for certain intermittent fasting. eating patterns. And that is pretty extreme if you think about it, which means you're going to be eating once every 1.5 days, which means you're probably eating like 3 days, if that, a week. Again, when you're thinking of a small window in a day that you're trying to get all of your calories in because you're still a whole human being, you still have the same needs at the end of the day. We often see sometimes an insufficient calorie consumption, which leads to a calorie deficit, and that's when that weight loss can come in. But again, it could slow metabolism. We talked about that starvation mode where your body doesn't know when the next time is going to be properly fed. And so it goes into that conservation mode, right? So energy conservation, and then it starts to leach off your lean muscle mass as the main fuel, because even a short 24-hour fast can really lower your BMR or your basal metabolic rate. And this is my take, but any diet that tells you to disregard hunger and satiety cues that are built into your system for a reason tends to be a red flag, because again, we have these hunger cues and we try to teach our patients to honor the hunger cues and to honor satiety cues so that you can stay consistent and have a meal routine that works for you long term. Next. All right. So this one probably not as popular, but very dangerous. It's called the mono diet or monotrophic diet, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is that you have one singular food or one food group that you can have. There are examples that I saw of it where you would only eat fruit or you would only eat potatoes. So these are just examples. You will lose a lot of weight because you are not eating anything else other than this food group. And you're going to be putting yourself at an extremely high risk for nutrient deficiency because, again, we require nutrition and vitamins and minerals and macros from all different food groups. There's 5 of them. So it's not really sustainable long term. This is like a perfect example of what we call a crash diet, where you would lose a whole bunch of weight, not be able to do it for a very long time, and then gain all that weight back, because once you start adding food groups back in, your weight's going to go up because your body's like, ooh, you're feeding me again. That's great. But then you go through that cycle of, the potential risks of disordered eating and kind of up and down, and then metabolism getting hit. The worst part about this diet is that there really is no scientific evidence. It was actually born from social media. There was a famous YouTuber in 2016, 2017 who made a video about it. She lost a whole bunch of weight and she was really influential in that time. And so people started doing it, which is the danger of social media and kind of the lack of evidence or the lack of accredited resources out there, right? And then there was a comedian who lost about 100 pounds and he talked about it in his show, but he ate vegetable soup for months and that was all he had. So again, this is definitely not something that we recommend at all. Next one. All right, detox teas and slim teas, also very popular. You can get them at any grocery store nowadays. Our bodies are very, very well designed. They're very well built. They're efficient machines. We have built-in detox systems. Your liver and your kidney is designed to detox your blood, and it does it 24/7, 365, which is great. A lot of detox teas tend to produce a laxative effect, and that is the illusion of weight loss, where you are running to the bathroom a lot and you are losing lots of fecal matter, but also hydration. And if you think about how much of your body is water and you're losing that, body mass tends to go down. It's not necessarily body fat. And potentially over time, it could be, again, lean muscle mass. This puts you at a very high risk of dehydration, which is dangerous. And also you risk losing your gut motility over time, because if you are reliant constantly on something that makes you go to the bathroom and you have this external kind of trigger coming in, your gut over time is going to be like, well, I don't have to work as hard with that peristalsis and the movement of your gut to get you going. And that can be very dangerous, and it's not a risk worth taking, like just in the long run.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, you're good. Next, we have the Paleo diet. It is also known as the caveman Stone Age diet. It takes inspiration, of course, from the Paleolithic era. It ended about 12,000 years ago. This was the time where, as humans, we had figured out how to make tools, and we were hunting and gathering and, planting things. And so we see a lot of whole foods, right? So it emphasizes fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and heart-healthy oils from like olives, lean proteins, eggs. The problem with this diet is that then again, it eliminates or discourages whole food groups. So whole grains are a no, dairy, legumes, potatoes, and then of course, processed foods and added sugars. Now the processed foods and added sugars make sense because back then they didn't have, candy and cookies and packet sugar. But in terms of the other food groups like whole grains, dairy, legumes, potatoes, you get a lot of really good nutrition from there. And these are things that will lead to deficiencies and the reliance on supplements, as we said, when you could easily be getting these nutrients from foods. And so again, a whole food approach or a food forward approach is generally what we go for because it is a lot more sustainable, not just economically, but just for the long run. Potatoes are great, legumes are great, whole grains are great, dairy is great. And so if they are available to you, you don't have to feel like, just because I'm sticking to this diet or I want to do this diet, like I have to cut all of this out from my daily intake, and then have to rely on a supplement to make sure that I'm not, deficient in anything and it's going to cause any kind of medical issues in the future. All right. Next one, I think this is our last diet, but it is the raw diet. This one's really dangerous. Please, please, please do not do the raw diet. It basically means you only eat raw fruits and vegetables. And recently, in the past year or so, raw milk has also entered the scene and it's become a trend. Extremely dangerous. So foods are defined as raw if they have never been heated over a specific temperature, 104 to 118 degrees Fahrenheit. It has never been refined or processed in any way, pasteurized. And pasteurization is basically like flashing your food, eggs, or milk with high temperatures for like a couple of seconds, or if it has been treated with pesticides. So all of that is defined as raw. Now, raw milk specifically, extremely dangerous. So many bacterial risks because, all of these bacteria, the milk comes out of the animal sterile because it's within the animal. But think about how far the milk has to go from cow. Even if you have your own cow, it has to be, you have to milk the cow and then it goes into a bucket of sorts and then it goes into a bowl, a cup, a jug, however you enjoy your milk. But so much can happen in between, especially nowadays where we have bacteria everywhere, right? So cooking and heating food, pasteurization is a form of food safety. Now with raw milk, I did want to touch on this because a lot of people nowadays, especially like the younger generation, are going into raw milk. And especially pregnant women are having raw milk, and it is extremely dangerous because the risk of listeria in pregnancy is very high, and the risk of miscarriage with raw milk when you're pregnant is extremely high as well. The idea behind raw milk is that they argue that it is a complete natural food. It has more amino acids, antimicrobials, and then it has more fatty acids than pasteurized milk. They've done a lot of research in this and realized that not all of it is necessarily true. There's a little bit of evidence saying that maybe it's a better choice for those with lactose intolerance or asthma, but it's really not worth the risk just because of the harmful bacteria that you would find in it. And you have things like salmonella and E. coli and staph. And so I don't think it's worth it at all. It can cause a lot of very, very serious conditions, especially if you are a high-risk population, like you're pregnant or you are a young child or you're an elderly person or you have some sort of autoimmune disease. Like it's not worth the risk at all. On the other side of things, many micronutrients and like antioxidants and vitamins and minerals are not fully bioavailable to the body without the addition of heat. So tomatoes is an example of this, where there's an antioxidant in tomatoes called lycopene, and it's not available to the body to be absorbed unless you heat your tomatoes. So not to say that you always have to eat your tomatoes heated, but that variety of cooking your foods and enjoying foods in all different forms is important. And of course, if you're not cooking your food, it does reduce the digestibility of food, and then it's a lot harder for the body to access everything you're trying to get from the food. Right? So we definitely don't recommend the raw diet at all.
I think it's also, so this is the last one. But like Ern was saying, like high risk populations, we had a webinar a couple months back about, immunocompromised adults with diabetes, right? So you're unable to fight infections as well, or your gut motility is slowed, because of maybe gastroparesis. So then you have bacteria sitting there. And so you're more likely to kind of, have the side effects of, bacterial infection. So keeping an eye, all these diets, right? It's balancing your risk. What is your risk with these diets, right? Diabetes puts you at a greater risk going into these fad diets because you have more that could possibly go wrong because you're trying to manage your blood sugars. So we want to create like an all-inclusive idea of what a healthy, balanced diet looks like, and that you don't have to rely on these diet patterns that are heavily restricting or putting you at greater risk for blood sugar management, bacterial disease, all those types of things. So really, really important stuff. So it seems really confusing, right? If all these fad diets are out there promising things and telling you how to eat, and they make it really confusing out there, but we want to keep it simple. So coming into counseling or talking with patients, we want you to be able to realize that, everyone's nutrition needs are different, but we take it back to the basics. There's no substitute for a well-balanced diet. Going through your nutrition needs specifically, there's no perfect way to eat, right? Processed foods have a place in our diet, right? We talk about ways to include them in a way that balances our blood sugar. Fad diets can complicate it, making nourishing yourself really, really confusing. So we don't want to add that added stress, which increases your blood sugars because of the added stress. So it's just kind of like we want to stop that snowball effect and just make it really simple. Next month, we're talking about bringing it back to the basics in diabetes with diabetes management, diet. So tune in for more of that on how to keep it simple. But it is possible to meet your nutrition needs and your diabetes management goals without one of these crazy diets. Just if you do decide to go through these diets, just make sure you talk to your healthcare professional about it, your dietitian, your doctor, because we want to be aware of it so we can guide you. We don't dictate what you eat. We educate you on maybe ways that things might benefit you more. So you have the autonomy to choose what's best for your body, but we just want to be in the know so that we can help you do it in a safe way. So just a quick summary to wrap it all up. Fad diets don't work in the long term from what we see in the data. They can be harmful to your body and compromise your diabetes management, make your sugars fluctuate dramatically. So we want to try to avoid them at all costs if we can. They're often marketed with just enough truth to seem convincing. So keep your eye out for those red flags that we talked about. So you can discern for yourself what you need, right, in your diet. What are your nutrition needs that are specific to you? Your carb, fat, protein, macronutrients, they all differ for you. So talk to your dietitian, talk to your physician about getting a referral to your dietitian, and just be sure to keep us in the know. If you do decide to go through any diet you see online, or you have questions about, is this a fad diet? Reach out to us. We're happy to kind of help you navigate through those decisions. All right. That concludes our presentation for today.
Well, thank you, Caroline and Aaron. Donna, do you have any additions, any questions?
No, I don't think so today. I think they did a great job of pulling together a lot of information because, again, from that marketing perspective, right, we hear all of these things and we're like, oh, that's my answer. And so I think it is important to make sure that you're looking at it in totality and talking to the dietitian to make sure you're not going to, miss anything important in your diet or cause any complications unknowingly.
So I guess these diets, they have advantages, disadvantages, regardless of what they decide to do. They need to do it with nutritionists and they help with their primary care physicians. That there has to be someone who is clinically qualified to do guide the patient. So anything that you do, you want to make sure that your healthcare providers know. Well, thank you so much. So there are a lot of there are a lot of information people probably need to process. So we'll be back next month with another topic.